The alien movies tell the epic tale of a little drinking bird making friends across the galaxy, though sadly, most of those friends get killed by aliens. Before you watch Alien Earth, here's a recap of the entire Alien timeline so far. When the world was a primordial nothing, an alien monk bro seeded the land with his goo. Thus begins Prometheus, and like most of the movie, this opening scene had audiences saying, "What the f***, Damon Lindelof?" It's a valid question, and one with an answer, more or less. It's easy to assume that this planet is Earth in the distant past, but it doesn't really matter what planet it is. It just serves as an example of what these engineers do. They go around putting their black goo into the DNA of different worlds, engineering all sorts of planets and critters and life forms to suit their needs. Could they have also done that to Earth? That's the question Prometheus wants you to ask, and the answer is yeah, most likely. Whenever or wherever that happened, the main events of Prometheus are set in 2089 and 2093, starting on Earth, when two archaeologists named Elizabeth Shaw and Charlie Holloway find a star map in a cave painting that points to a distant moon designated LV-223. Hoping to find clues to the origins of life on Earth, they head off for LV-223 with a group of scientists. Scientists in quotes there, and an android named David, who's pretty important to everything. See, just as Shaw is curious about her makers, David is also curious about his, and is starting to come to the conclusion that they kind of suck.
I was designed like this because you people are more comfortable interacting with your own kind.
So when they find some of that black engineer goo in urns, David takes a few samples for his own personal experimentation. David has something of a fondness for Lawrence of Arabia, which is about a dude who really wants to be seen as a god.
The trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts.
Given that, you think David would take a liking to the engineers, what with their seemingly godlike powers of creation and all, but even they're a little disappointing in the end.
Mortal after all.
David thinks he can do better than them, so when Holloway gets drunk later that night, David slips a little goo roofie in his drink just to see what happens. What happens is this. Followed shortly by this. Like we saw in the opening sequence, the black goo mutates DNA, first breaking it down, then rebuilding it into something new and potentially monstrous. Would Holloway have continued to change into something completely different if Vickers hadn't torched him? It's possible. But hold on, we know what you're saying, we skipped something important. Before any of this happens, Holloway in turn infects Shaw with the little hanky-panky goo baby, and that's where we see what the goo can really do. We should probably mention that other stuff has been happening along with all these plot points. So, briefly, these guys, they died. Idris Elba likes accordions, Peter Weyland was on the ship in secret the whole time, and is also Vickers' dad. They all go and wake up an engineer who may be many things, none of which could be called a licensed chiropractor. In the end, this whole journey to find God and the answers to life and a sense of meaning in this stagnant existence ends with an episode of WWE SmackDown and death for almost everyone involved. What the f***, Lindelof? But wait, a new life has emerged from the fumbles and failures of the Prometheus crew. Shaw's baby Squidbilly. Mazel tov! At this point, all these threads start to converge. The engineer boots up his 2,000-year-old ship to presumably go to Earth, while Shaw begs Idris Elba to kill everyone left by crashing into the engineer's ship, thereby saving Earth. All that happens, and in the Rebel of Vickers escape pod following the crash, we find that Shaw's little baby has grown into a big boy, a trilobite, in the parlance of us nerds. And for the first time in the first Alien movie in 15 years, we get an alien, sort of. Xenomorphs in the form we usually see them come when that species gestates inside humans. This creature came from a raw soup with unknown DNA, went through an unusual birthing process, and emerged as something new, the protomorph. And when it drops its own baby into the engineer, the resulting chest burster is a fully formed alien called a deacon, that again is distinctly different from a regular Xeno. Confusing? Sure. And it's about to get even more complicated. At the end of Prometheus, Shaw and David's head fly off to find an engineer world and find out why they put our species up for existential adoption.
They created us. Then they tried to kill us. I deserve to know why.
But David still has his god complex going on, so when they do find an engineer world, he rains down a storm of death on everyone in it and basically wipes the slate clean. so he can start experimenting with his little pets. Is this the engineer world? If there even still is such a place, it's not here. The inhabitants clearly have engineer DNA, but they aren't exactly the same, and they treat the arrival of the engineer ship the way a primitive tribe might herald the return of their gods. One theory is that this is one of the many worlds the engineers seeded, and unlike with Earth, they returned occasionally to help guide the progress of their civilization. Either way, they're all dead now. Same with Shaw, who David used as a host to incubate one of his aliens.
I loved her, of course.
All this happens before the crew of the USCSS Covenant shows up in the year 2104, and by that point, David has made some delightful progress with his goo. The Covenant is a colony ship with a cargo of a couple thousand colonists in hypersleep and about 1,000 more embryos in cold storage to help kick things off when they reach their new world. This David-looking guy is Walter, the ship's android. Thanks to a random radiation burst in space, the crew wakes up early, coincidentally in range of a beacon from Shaw that draws them to David's hell planet.
That's John Denver. That's Take Me Home Country Roads.
Gotta be kidding.
Oh no, I never kid about John Denver.
So they're all like humans? Way out here in space? What the Ridley Scott, and chart a course for the planet to investigate, even though they're responsible for like 3,000 other people.
This is good judgment.
The ground team tracks the beacon to its source, but things start going wrong pretty quickly. After breathing in some puffball spores, two guys start growing neomorphs, smaller, cuter aliens that just burst out every which way once they've grown up. No chests needed. The dropship blows up and the neomorphs nearly kill the whole crew, until David shows up to save them. That's when, story-wise, things start getting dicey. Safe inside David's Temple of Misery, he slowly reveals what he's been doing all alone on this planet, experimenting on the native life forms to bring out the full potential of the goo.
Soon enough, I began a bit of genetic experimentation of my own. Some crossbreeding, hybridizing, what have you.
The problem is that aside from Shaw, he hasn't had any humans to practice on. Until now. A lot of people pause the movie at this point and go vomit what remains of their loyalty to the franchise all over the bathroom floor, because the surface takeaway is that David ultimately created the xenomorphs, which means 30+ years of mystery and lore behind these things boils down to a bored robot squirting special juice onto things to see what takes. But realistically, is that what happened? The engineer installation from thousands of years ago has a mural showing a xenomorph, or at least a deacon, which means the engineers had been tampering with this specific life form for a while. David, conversely, seems to be trying to recreate Grandma's soup by trial and error. He has the right ingredients, but no recipe book. But he's a smart robot, and somewhere along the line he realized that recreating this perfect organism requires a human host. So, did David create the eggs that ended up on LV-426? That's not our takeaway, especially since the space jockey appears to have been there much longer than the gap between Covenant and Alien.
Looks like it's been dead a long time. Fossilized.
But feel free to disagree in the comments. So, back to Covenant. Realizing the crew's in danger, Cowboy Kenny Powers pilots the ship's cargo sled down to the surface for a nail-biting rescue scene, which, say what you want about the movie, is pretty fun. Walter and David get into a fistfight, which Walter wins. They make it back up to the Covenant, where they're finally safe, until they aren't anymore. Until they are again. The survivors bed back down to continue their flight to Origai 6. But there's one last twist. That's not Walter. It's a Walterganger, a doppel-David of the worst kind. And he's regurgitating alien embryos to keep his experiments going on all those handy napping colonists. Where's that going to lead? Maybe one day we'll find out. But then again, maybe we won't. Except for the beginning of Prometheus, and the special edition ending of Resurrection, and maybe Gateway Station's orbit in Aliens, if you want to count that. Except for those, there's one frontier to which the main Alien franchise has never gone: Earth. FX's upcoming series Alien Earth is reportedly set in the year 2120. 2 years before the Nostromo finds LV-426 in Alien. According to FX's website, the series will feature a deep space research ship crash landing on Earth. It'll have Weyland-Yutani, it'll have synthetics, and it'll have aliens. Ridley Scott is producing, and Noah Hawley, who was behind Legion and Fargo, is showrunning. Production's been pretty tight-lipped on the finer beats of the story, and that's fine. You didn't come here to get spoiled on Alien Earth. You came for a refresher on the story so far. So now that we know where Earth fits in the timeline, let's keep going and look at where it all began. In 2122, 2 years after whatever happens in Alien Earth, USCSS Nostromo is on its way home when it picks up a beacon originating from a nearby exomoon designated LV-426. Unlike a lot of the fancier ships in Weyland-Yutani's fleet, this thing's a glorified tugboat, and its crew is a bunch of blue-collar space workers who just want to finish their contract and get paid. And when they find out that they got woken up early because of some stupid moon, they aren't happy.
It's not my contract to do this kind of duty. And what about the money? If you want to give me some money to do, I'd be happy to, just watch.
But it's company policy to check these things out, so that's what they have to do. Unfortunately, it's the last thing some of them ever do. Whatever they were expecting, it probably wasn't a derelict alien spacecraft with a giant corpse in a bay full of creepy, juicy eggs. And we're almost positive they weren't expecting parasitic face-hugging aliens. Kane hangs out with that thing for a while, then seems to get better, but you know where this is leading. Suffice it to say, Kane doesn't make it. Pretty gross, huh? And that's how the world was first introduced to xenomorphs. These are the ultimate killing machines, or as some characters like to say,
Perfect organism.
they have acid for blood, grow to full size incredibly fast, and are really, really good at stretching a movie's budget by hiding in dark places. Using the ship's air vents and crawl spaces, the alien starts picking off the crew one by one, and in some versions of the movie, dragging them back to cocoon their living bodies in the bowels of the ship. If only, among this ragtag crew of space tuggers, there was someone with nerves of steel, a sharp mind, and unflinching determination to save a cat. When Alien starts, Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley is kind of a joke to some of the crew. She gets made fun of, ignored, and slapped around on the regular. But once the chestburster shows up and gets loose on the ship, the dynamic starts to change. After Dallas learns what it feels like to be a TV dinner, Ripley sort of slips into the leadership role by default.
Well, let's talk about killing it. We know it's using the air shafts. Will you listen to me, Parker?
Lambert has no idea what to do. Parker mostly shouts about things, and Ash seems suspiciously unmotivated to kill this thing. It turns out that Ash, who's a robot by the way, but you already know that, has orders to capture this thing for study, regardless of what happens to the crew. Not only is there a relentlessly murdery alien stalking everyone, but now HR is getting involved. You know, right there, things are about to get spicy, but you don't expect them to get milky. Man, that never gets old. So, once Ash is dead and Parker and Lambert die a little later, Ripley is left alone with the alien. She sets the ship's engines on a timer to catastrophically melt down. Then, and this is the best part, she goes back to save the cat. You know the rest of the story after that. There's some flamethrower action, a surprise alien in the escape pod, and a harrowing climax that ends with Ripley punting the alien out of the airlock with a harpoon gun. With the alien dead, Ripley and Jonesy settle into a cryopod and hope that someone out there in the vast cold reaches of space will eventually find them. You know how we just said Ripley killed the alien on the Nostromo? That was a lie. Apparently, those cold-blooded bastards can survive the vacuum of space and the heat of a direct thruster blast to the face. And sometime in the next 20 years, it's picked up by Weyland-Yutani.
Lack of oxygen and food is of no true consequence to this perfect organism.
They took it to the Renaissance station and started reverse engineering facehuggers. A lot of facehuggers. But the xenomorph eventually escaped and destroyed half the station when its blood melted through the hull. Whoops! Meanwhile, on a nearby planet called LV-410, a girl named Rain dreams of leaving her crappy life behind and traveling to a distant planet outside of Weyland-Yutani control, where she can live out her days with her robot brother Andy and watch the sunsets.
They say Yvaga has the most incredible sunsets. I've seen them. In my dreams.
To get there, she and a group of other colonists hatch a plan to steal some supplies from an abandoned space station, the Renaissance. Their search takes them deep into the R&D side of the station, where they accidentally trigger a lockdown and release all those facehuggers from stasis. Whoops! Andy doesn't have the clearance to open the doors to let them out, so they install the control module from the station's resident android, Rook, not Ash. The chip gives Andy a performance upgrade, but it also shifts his loyalties to Weyland-Yutani, and he surreptitiously becomes Rook's arms and legs, in a manner of speaking.
I'm afraid I have a new directive. To do what's best for the company.
The whole time, Kay, has been trying her hardest not to get typecast as a pregnant sci-fi adventurer, but she's finding it a little tough, what with her being pregnant and all. That becomes important when she gets taken by the xenomorph. The gang later finds her badly injured, and Andy offers her an experimental compound called Z01. Yeah, you know what that is. You know exactly what that is. It's engineer goo that Rook extracted and bottled during his experiments on the xenomorph, which he hopes will transform humans into perfect spacefaring organisms.
Prometheus fire. A divine gift to humanity.
And if you stuck with us through the whole Prometheus recap, you know that putting it into a pregnant person isn't going to lead to anything good. Like Kay giving birth to a humanish baby that rapidly grows into a giant hybrid Slenderman, and gives Rain one final boss fight before she burns a hole in the ship using acid from the offspring's own birthing pod. After that, she and Andy settle in for the long haul out to Yvaga 3, and hopefully a better life. That was a fun side adventure, right? Anyway, let's get back to Ripley. After apparently not killing the xenomorph on the Nostromo, she ends up drifting through space for 57 years until a salvage crew finds her in the year 2179. She actually outlived her own daughter, something you only learn from watching the director's cut, but which sort of explains why she's so protective of Newt in the second half of Aliens. She's convinced by a guy who works for Weyland-Yutani, a fella named Burke, to join a crew of Space Marines on the USS Sulaco en route back to LV-426 to figure out why a colony on the planet suddenly stopped communicating.
Is this gonna be a stand-up fight, sir, or another bug hunt?
It's another bug hunt. When they get there, all the colonists are dead, except a feral little girl named Newt. And all those dead colonists spawned a whole flock of aliens that start picking off the Space Marines. Those Marines aren't really important in the big picture, but since you asked, there's a guy named Gorman who isn't very good at his job, a guy named Apone who is good at his job, a guy named Hudson who looks a whole lot like Bill Paxton, and a guy named Hicks who doesn't look like Bill Paxton. Still with us?
What is it, Hicks?
Hudson, sir. He's Hicks.
Cool. Also, there are some other people and a robot named Bishop who prefers to be called an artificial person.
I prefer the term artificial person.
Just said that, Bishop. We've got a lot of movies to cover and we're moving fast, so try to keep up. Right, so after a bunch of this, some of this, and a whole lot of this, it's starting to look like a few of them might have a shot at making it out alive. But there's a twist. Alien movies all need a couple things to properly call themselves an alien movie. First, aliens, that's a big one. You'll also find at least part of a synthetic human in all the films, and a badass heroine. But most importantly, you need a thrilling dose of corporate malfeasance. Ash set the bar high, but when his turn comes around in Aliens, Burke says, "Hold my C-ration protein supplement." He's not just going to sneak an alien back home for the company, he's going to smuggle it back inside people.
He figured that he could get an alien back through quarantine if one of us was impregnated.
Burke set those facehuggers loose in the medbay. Burke switched off the security feed so nobody would see Ripley and Newt getting facehugged, and Burke planned to turn off everyone else's cryopods on the trip home so there wouldn't be any witnesses.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them each other over for a percentage.
Obviously, a guy like that isn't going to last very long, but the danger doesn't end with Burke. There are still aliens to worry about, including one big mother. Ripley's a pretty great action hero. She's good at all the stuff she does, but more important than that, she puts other people first. She makes sure Hicks gets to safety when he's all burned up with acid blood. And when Newt gets grabbed by a xenomorph, she heads back into the alien nest to get her out of there, even though the entire station is about to explode.
Bishop! How much time?
Plenty. 26 minutes.
Okay, first of all, we don't know about you, Bishop, but 26 minutes is hardly plenty of time to get dressed after a shower, let alone duct tape several guns together, infiltrate an alien nest, pull a kid out of a cocoon of alien goop, barbecue the entire place, and make it back to the dropship. But this is Ripley we're talking about, and that's what she does. Back up in the Sulaco, it seems like the worst is behind them. Until that big dumb alien ladybug reveals that she's been playing 4D chess the whole time and takes Ripley's Bishop. Turns out she's pretty pissed about Ripley blowing up all her children. Anyway, you know what happens next.
Get away from her, you.
Hell yeah! Ripley boss fights the alien queen to the death in a costume that young men have been using to get dates ever since.
Get away from those hotties!
After that, it's back to cryosleep for Ripley, Hicks, Newt, and the top third of Bishop. And back to Earth. Or is it? One of the cool things about the Alien movies is that the further you go in the universe's timeline, the worse the technology gets. Prometheus had those nifty flying scanner bots that could map an entire ancient ziggurat in minutes, and the Covenant ship was pretty quick about alerting the crew to a foreign life form on board, even with Mother rebooting. The fully automated, crewless Sulaco, on the other hand, didn't know there was an egg or a facehugger on board until it had set fire to most of the ship. And the ship responded by jettisoning the cryopods onto the nearest planet. A perfect plan, except that it's not. Hicks and Newt are killed in the crash, and Ripley wakes up to find herself on a hellish prison planet populated by murderers. And worse. No, not Earth. Fury 161, which has been more or less decommissioned as a prison except for about 24 inmates who decided to stay behind and find God. While Ripley acquaints herself with this whimsical cast of characters, a facehugger that snuck out of the crash site acquaints itself with a dog, or an ox, depending on which version of the movie you're watching. The end result is the same either way. A bigger, more animalistic xenomorph set loose in the dingy halls and maintenance shafts of the prison. The theatrical cut and so-called assembly cut of Alien 3 aren't so different that you can call them different movies, but they do make recapping the plot a little tougher. Some parts are stitched together differently, and for the 2010 release, some of the actors even came back to ADR different bits of dialogue. Most of it plays out the same though. Ripley tries to convince the warden and the other prisoners that there's a bloodthirsty alien lurking around, and they don't believe her until the bodies start to pile up.
It was the dragon. Feeds on minds. Nobody can stop it.
Once everyone's on the same page, they come up with a plan to trap the alien in a reinforced toxic waste containment room. It only works in the assembly cut. They get the alien contained until Scarface here decides he wants to talk to it and lets it back out. A little bit after that, Ripley discovers that she has a queen chestburster in her, and everything goes downhill from there. Alien 3 is the bleakest entry in the franchise, hands down. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it's the alien embryo in her chest or the movie's depressing atmosphere that makes Ripley so keen on ending it. But we're leaning towards the latter. Even Bishop gets one look at Alien 3 and wants back out.
Do me a favor. Disconnect me.
Ripley spends the last third of the movie trying her hardest to die, and only puts it off long enough to help the other characters. The xenomorph won't touch her, thanks to the chestburster gestating inside her, so she agrees to one last hurrah to lure the alien into a corridor where they can shower it with molten lead. The plan doesn't go exactly the way they wanted, but they get it in the end. So with that done, and with Weyland-Yutani reps closing in to extract the queen, Ripley throws herself into a furnace. Sometimes the queen even bursts out as she falls. And that's the end of the Ripley saga in the Alien movies. Or is it? Some 200 years after falling into a big pot of molten metal, Ripley wakes up on the USM Yvaga with fractured memories and the vocabulary of an infant.
Fork. It's fork.
See, that's not Ripley. That's Ripley 8, a clone made with blood from the pre-death Ripley when she was carrying the alien queen chestburster. During the cloning process, their DNA mingle, meaning that this Ripley has a bit of acid blood, enhanced senses and reflexes, and mad court skills. The scientists on the Yvaga also managed to clone the queen, which they're using to create their very own pack of xenomorphs. Now, do we really need to get into all the nitty-gritty details of alien resurrection? Does anybody ever? This is not a movie anyone's ever itching to rewatch. It's probably enough to say the xenomorphs escape, Winona Ryder is a robot, and most of the characters die, like usual. That said, there are two parts we want to talk about in a little more detail just real quick. It probably sounds like we hate Resurrection, but we don't. Not at all. It's not a good movie, but it's fun in its own grimy way. And say what you want about the film as a whole, but the clone room definitely sticks with you. The physical props and prosthetics are appropriately disturbing, and Ripley's mercy killing of the entire lab is surprisingly emotional. If you're going to watch it for that, and for the newborn. Near the end of Resurrection, the script goes completely off the rails. Remember how Ripley 8 has alien DNA? Well, the Queen has Ripley DNA, including working ovaries.
She is giving birth for you, Ripley, and now she is perfect!
Due to a series of biological processes we don't entirely understand, the Queen gives birth to an alien-human hybrid with Ripley's DNA. Mazel tov! That handsome, freshly jellied fella gets one sniff of the Queen and immediately tears her apart, and then decides that Ripley will be its real mom. We told you, it gets weird. Well, unfortunately for the newborn, it's still an alien abomination. And later, when they're escaping the Yvaga, Ripley tricks it by making it think she loves it, only to gruesomely disintegrate the entire thing through a pinhole in the ship's window. It's actually kind of sad. The look of anguish and betrayal on this thing's face as all its insides get sucked through a hole in its back makes you wish it would somehow escape, and it and Ripley would go and live their lives and watch sunsets on Yvaga together. Instead, this happens. It's a bleak ending to the chronological Alien timeline, but at least Earth is still fine. Oh, wait, never mind. The Alien and Predator franchises are strange bedfellows. They've crossed over in comics, novels, video games, and a couple standalone movies. Remember those? But in the mainline movie franchises, it sort of feels like Predator really wants to be a part of the Alien movies, and Alien keeps ignoring it like the weird kid on the playground. So, once again, the most recent Alien, Romulus, came and went without even a passing mention of any Yautja out and about. And yet we have Predator Badlands putting a direct reference to Weyland-Yutani in its first trailer. In case you missed it, it was this shot of Elle Fanning's character pulling the same rebooting rolled back eyes as Andy did in Romulus, complete with the Weyland-Yutani logo stamped on the whites. So, are they finally agreeing to share a universe for real? Well, never say never. We doubt Alien Earth will be the one to make it happen. But Romulus director Fede Alvarez has said that he's not totally against collaborating with Badlands director Dan Trachtenberg on a crossover movie. He told Collider that he'd love to do it as a total surprise for the audience, saying, "The best AVP will be the one that you don't know is AVP until the other guy shows up. You think you're watching a Predator movie and then they land in some place and there are creatures and hell, it's a xenomorph. That'd be a pretty cool surprise in Badlands. As for whether or not it'll happen, well,
I can't lie about your chances, but you have my sympathies.